The chamber of the Galactic Unity Council stretched wide and tall. Its curved walls made of dark metal that absorbed light and gave the room a feeling of cold authority. And in the center of this massive space, 12 figures sat around a crescent-shaped table, each one representing a species that had conquered stars and bent lesser civilizations to their will. Chancellor Zorath of the Veluxi stood at the head of the table, his gray skin pulled tight over angular bones, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled leaders with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of galactic dominance. "The matter before us today concerns the species known as humans," he announced. And a holographic image of Earth appeared above the table, spinning slowly, its blue oceans and green continents looking small and fragile against the darkness of space. For 300 cycles, we have watched them from afar, and in that time they have spread beyond their birth world like a disease, colonizing the red planet they call Mars, building stations around the gas giants, and developing technology at a rate that defies all projections. A murmur went through the chamber, and several of the representatives leaned forward with interest, their various eyes and sensory organs fixed on the image of the tiny world that had caused so much concern. Ambassador Kira Neth of the Solari raised one of her slender hands, her silver skin catching the dim light as she moved, and her voice was soft but carried clearly through the chamber. "Chancellor, I must urge caution in this matter, for my research teams have spent decades studying humanity, and what we have found troubles me deeply." Zorath's 4 eyes narrowed with impatience, but he gestured for her to continue. "Humans are unlike any species we have encountered before," Kira Neth explained, her words careful and measured. "They evolved on a world of extreme conditions, a planet with violent weather patterns, deadly predators, toxic plant life, and diseases that mutate faster than any we have cataloged. And yet, they did not merely survive these challenges, they conquered them." "All species face challenges," interrupted General Vorn of the Krethax, his massive armored body shifting in his seat. "We conquered our challenges as well, and we built an empire that spans 1,000 star systems. So why should we fear these soft-skinned creatures?" Kira Neth turned to face him, and though she was half his size, she did not flinch from his aggressive tone. "Because humans do something no other species does," she replied. "They fight among themselves constantly, waging wars that kill millions of their own kind. And yet these wars do not weaken them, they make them stronger, forcing them to develop new weapons, new strategies, new ways of killing. And they have been perfecting the art of war for their entire existence as a species." Chancellor Zorath waved a dismissive hand, cutting off the discussion before it could continue. "Enough of this fear-mongering," he declared, his voice sharp with authority. "We have conquered over 400 species, and not one of them has ever posed a true threat to the Council. And these humans are no different. They have no unified military force, no planetary shield network, and their spacefaring capability is limited to their own star system." We looked around the table, meeting each representative's gaze in turn. "I propose that we end this potential threat before it can grow any larger. And I call for an immediate vote on the invasion and subjugation of Earth." The vote was swift and unanimous, with even Kira Neth forced to accept the will of the Council. Though her silver face was troubled as she cast her vote, Fleet Commander Drevax received the orders within the hour, and his chest swelled with pride as he read them. For he had spent his entire life preparing for a moment like this, and now he would lead the largest armada in galactic history to crush a species that had dared to expand beyond its rightful place in the universe. The fleet gathered at the edge of Council space, a force so massive that it blocked out the light of nearby stars when viewed from certain angles. And the numbers were staggering even to those who commanded them: 9,700 warships, ranging from nimble fighters to massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons. And aboard those ships were 6 million soldiers, each one trained from birth for combat, each one eager to prove their worth against a new enemy. Dravax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched as the last of his ships fell into formation. "Send word to the Council," he ordered his communications officer. "Tell them that the fleet departs for Earth, and we shall return within 1 lunar cycle with the humans in chains." The Armada jumped into hyperspace, leaving behind a council that was already celebrating their inevitable victory. But across the galaxy, in a place the council knew nothing about, other preparations were being made. General Daniel Porter sat in a command center buried beneath thousands of feet of solid rock, deep in the heart of the mountains that humans called the Rockies. And on the screens before him, red warning lights were flashing in patterns that he had hoped he would never see. "Deep space sensors have confirmed the contact," reported Colonel Amy Walsh, her voice steady despite the fear that must have been churning in her gut. "We are tracking approximately 9,700 vessels, all heading directly for our solar system, and at their current speed. They will arrive in approximately 3 weeks." Porter closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, his face was calm and his voice was quiet. "Activate protocol blackout," he ordered. "Contact every nation through secure channels and begin preparations. We have 3 weeks to get ready for the fight of our lives." He picked up a phone that connected directly to the Secretary of Defense, and when the voice on the other end answered, Porter spoke only 5 words. "They are coming for us." In cities around the world, people went about their daily lives, unaware that humanity's greatest test was approaching. And in military bases and hidden facilities on every continent, soldiers and scientists and engineers began working around the clock, preparing defenses that had been planned for this moment since the first alien signal was detected decades ago. The galaxy thought humans were weak and unprepared, divided and easy to conquer. But the galaxy had never faced a species like humanity before, and in 3 weeks, they would learn exactly what that meant. The Armada dropped out of hyperspace beyond the orbit of Neptune, and Commander Dravax felt a surge of satisfaction as he watched his fleet reassemble in perfect formation. Thousands of warships spreading across the darkness like a swarm of predators closing in on helpless prey. "Status report," he demanded, his 4 eyes scanning the tactical displays that surrounded his command throne. "All ships have completed the jump successfully." "Commander," replied his second officer, a younger Velixi named Kethan, who had earned his position through skill and ruthless ambition, "we are detecting no energy signatures from Earth's early warning systems, which means they have no idea we are here." Dravax allowed himself a thin smile, his sharp teeth glinting in the bridge lights. "Excellent order the fleet into standard invasion formation, with heavy cruisers at the center, fighter carriers on the flanks, and troop transports protected in the rear, and begin our approach to the inner system." The Armada moved forward like a wave of death, and aboard each ship, soldiers checked their weapons and prepared for the battle ahead, confident that victory was already assured on Earth. The situation could not have been more different from what Dravax imagined, and command centers scattered across the planet. Military leaders tracked the enemy fleet's approach with grim determination, and every movement the aliens made was recorded, analyzed, and shared among the allied nations that had put aside their differences to face this common threat. "They are exactly where we expected them to be," General Porter observed, watching the red dots on his screen that represented the enemy ships. "And they are moving in exactly the formation we predicted." Colonel Walsh nodded, her expression focused and intense. "Our analysts believe they will reach Mars orbit in approximately 6 days, which gives us time to complete our preparations and position our assets." Porter turned to face the large map that dominated one wall of the command center. showing Earth and the surrounding space with all of their hidden defenses marked in blue. "What is the status of our orbital stations?" he asked. "All 12 stations are fully operational and crewed by volunteers who understand the risks," Walsh replied. "Captain Lavra Mitchell has command of Freedom's Watch, our primary defense platform, and she reports that her people are ready, far above Earth, in the cold vacuum of space." Captain Laura Mitchell stood on the bridge of Freedom's Watch and looked out at the stars that humanity had always dreamed of reaching. The station was not large by galactic standards, just a collection of modules and weapons platforms held together by metal and human determination. But it was home to 200 men and women who had chosen to stand between their planet and whatever came from the darkness. "Captain, we are receiving the latest tracking data," reported Lieutenant Kevin Brooks, a young officer who had graduated at the top of his class and had immediately volunteered for this assignment when he learned what was coming. "The enemy fleet has just passed the orbit of Uranus." Mitchell studied the data on her screen. Noting the size and configuration of the approaching force, "They have no idea what is waiting for them, do they?" Brooks asked, his voice carrying a hint of nervous excitement. Mitchell shook her head slowly, her eyes still fixed on the tactical display. "No, they do not, and by the time they figure it out, it will be too late for them to do anything about it." She turned to address her crew, her voice carrying across the bridge with the confidence of someone who had accepted her fate and found peace with it. "I want everyone to understand something. We are not expected to stop that fleet, because no one could stop a force that size with the resources we have. But what we can do is hurt them, slow them down, and show them that humanity will not go quietly into the night." The crew listened in silence, their faces showing a mixture of fear and determination. Every minute we buy gives Earth more time to prepare, and every ship we destroy is one less ship that will threaten our families and our homes. So, when the time comes, I expect each of you to give everything you have. "Yes, Captain," came the unified response, and Mitchell felt a surge of pride in the people she commanded. Meanwhile, the Armada continued its approach, and Commander Drevax grew more confident with each passing hour. "Transmit the standard surrender demand on all frequencies and in every language our translators have identified," he ordered. "Inform the humans that resistance is futile and that those who submit peacefully will be treated with mercy." The message was broadcast toward Earth, and Drevax waited for the response with the patience of a predator who knew that his prey had nowhere to run, but no response came. And the silence stretched on as the fleet moved deeper into the solar system. "Perhaps their communications technology is too primitive to receive our transmission," Cathan suggested. Though doubt had crept into his voice, Drevax dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "It does not matter whether they hurt us or not, because the result will be the same. They will bow before the Council, or they will be destroyed." The Armada crossed the asteroid belt on the 5th day, and that was when the first surprise came without warning. Dozens of objects that had appeared to be ordinary rocks suddenly activated, revealing themselves as weapons platforms that had been hidden among the asteroids for years. Waiting for this exact moment, kinetic projectiles launched from the platforms at incredible speed, crossing the distance between the asteroids and the fleet in seconds. And before shields could be raised or evasive maneuvers could be executed, 47 ships were struck and destroyed in brilliant flashes of light. Alarms wailed across the flagship's bridge, and Drevax gripped the arms of his command throne as his ship shuddered from a near miss. "What is happening?" he demanded, his voice rising with anger and confusion. "We are under attack from concealed weapons platforms, Commander," Cathan reported, his fingers flying across his console as he tried to make sense of the chaos. "The platform showed no energy signatures until the moment they fired. We had no way of detecting them." Drevax stared at the tactical display, watching as more of his ships took damage from the hidden weapons. Destroy those platforms and continue our advance," he ordered, his voice cold with fury. "This changes nothing. We will crush these humans and make them pay for every ship they have destroyed." The fleet pressed forward, eliminating the asteroid platforms with overwhelming firepower. But the damage had been done. 37 ships were gone, and for the first time, doubt had entered the minds of the Council's warriors. They had expected an easy conquest, but humanity had shown them that nothing about this war would be easy. The Armada reached Mars on the 7th day, and Commander Drevax ordered a halt to assess the situation before continuing toward Earth. The red planet hung in the viewport like a rusty coin, its surface marked by the small domes and structures of human colonies that had been built over the past century. And from this distance, everything appeared quiet and peaceful. "I am detecting no weapon signatures, no military vessels, and no defensive installations," Kethan reported, his voice puzzled. The humans appeared to have abandoned any attempt to defend this world. Drevax considered the information for a moment, his four eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Perhaps they have concentrated all their forces around Earth," he mused. "But we cannot leave an unsecured world at our backs. So I want 800 ships to land troops and secure the Martian colonies while the main fleet continues toward the primary objective." The detachment broke away from the Armada and descended toward the Martian surface, their landing craft deploying thousands of soldiers, who spread out across the colony domes with weapons ready. But when they entered the habitats, they found something that made even the most hardened warriors feel uneasy. The colonies were empty, completely and utterly abandoned, with no sign of the humans who had lived there just days before. Soldiers moved through corridors that should have been filled with people, finding meals left half-eaten on tables, personal belongings scattered on floors, and children's toys lying in corners as if their owners had simply vanished in the middle of playing. "Where did they go?" whispered a young soldier named Vranik, his weapon trembling slightly in his grip. His squad leader had no answer, because there was no answer that made sense. The humans had been here recently. The food was not yet spoiled. The air recyclers were still running, and power flowed through the systems, but the people themselves were gone, as if they had never existed at all on the flagship orbiting high above. Drevax received reports from the landing teams with growing confusion. They could not have evacuated so many people without us detecting their ships, Kethan argued. So they must still be here somewhere, hiding in bunkers or tunnels beneath the surface. "Then find them," Drevax ordered. "Search every structure, scan every underground cavity, and do not rest until every human on that planet is accounted for." The soldiers spread out across the Martian colonies, their scanners probing the ground beneath their feet. But they found nothing except rock and more rock, and then the ground began to shake deep beneath the surface of Mars, in tunnels that no scanner could penetrate. Nuclear charges that had been planted years ago in anticipation of this very moment began to detonate in a carefully planned sequence. The explosions were not designed to kill. They were designed to create chaos. Massive sinkholes opened beneath the landed ships, swallowing vessels whole as the ground collapsed into the hidden cavities below. And those ships that were not swallowed found themselves tilting and crashing as the terrain shifted without warning. Dust storms erupted from the disturbed surface, clouds of red particles so thick that they blinded sensors and blocked communications, and in the sudden darkness, the alien soldiers could see nothing but swirling chaos. That was when the humans emerged strike. Teams that had been hiding in bunkers so deep and so well shielded that no alien technology could detect them burst from the ground like vengeful ghosts, armed with weapons designed specifically for this moment. And they fell upon the confused enemy with a fury that shocked even themselves. The battle in the dust was brutal and short, and when it ended, of the 800 ships that had descended to Mars, Only 17 managed to escape back to orbit. The rest were destroyed or captured. Their crews, either dead or prisoners of an enemy, they had badly underestimated Commander Drevax, received the news with a face like stone. But inside his chest, something cold had begun to form. He had lost over 800 ships without even reaching Earth. And for the first time in his long military career, he felt the stirrings of doubt. "We continue to Earth," he ordered, his voice flat and hard. "The humans have won a small victory, but they cannot stand against the full might of our fleet." The Armada accelerated toward the blue planet that grew larger in their viewports with each passing hour. And around that planet, the orbital defense stations prepared for battle. Captain Laura Mitchell received the final report of the Mars engagement with a grim nod. "They know we are not helpless now," she told her crew, "and they will not underestimate us again. Which means we need to make every shot count." The enemy fleet came into weapons range on the 9th day, and Freedom's Watch opened fire with everything it had. Railguns hurled projectiles at incredible velocities. Missiles streaked through the void in clusters of destruction, and laser batteries carved lines of fire across the darkness. And for a few glorious minutes, it seemed like the tiny stations might actually hold back the tide. But the enemy was too numerous and too powerful. And one by one, the stations began to fall. Station Sentinel-7 was the first to go, its hull breached by concentrated fire from a dozen enemy cruisers. And as atmosphere vented into space and systems failed throughout the structure, Captain Dennis Wayne ordered his surviving crew to the escape pods before triggering the self-destruct sequence. The explosion took 3 enemy ships with its station. Guardian 3 followed minutes later, and then Watchtower 9, each one fighting until the very end. Each one making the enemy pay dearly for every inch of progress on Freedom's watch. Nurse Amy Carter worked frantically in the medical bay, treating wounds and stabilizing patients as the station shook from constant impacts. A young soldier with burns covering half his face grabbed her arm, his eyes wide with fear. "Can we win this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Amy looked at him for a long moment, and then she spoke with a conviction that came from somewhere deep inside her soul. "We do not have to win," she said. "We just have to make them bleed enough that Earth has a chance." She returned to her work, and above her, the battle raged on as humanity's first line of defense gave everything they had for the world they loved. When the last orbital station finally fell silent, the enemy fleet had lost over 1,200 additional ships, and their ammunition stores were nearly empty. It was not a victory for humanity, but it was something more important. It was a warning of what was to come. The troop transports descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls glowing from the heat of entry as they carried millions of soldiers toward the surface below. And Commander Drevax watched from orbit with satisfaction, certain that the worst of the fighting was behind them. The orbital stations had been destroyed. The human space forces had been eliminated. And now it was simply a matter of landing troops and crushing whatever primitive resistance remained. "All units are to secure major population centers first," Drevax ordered. "Once we control the cities, the rest of the planet will fall quickly." The transports touched down on every continent, and soldiers poured out with weapons ready, expecting to find a terrified population waiting to surrender. What they found instead was a nightmare in North America. The first landing force set down near a city that appeared completely defenseless, its buildings dark and its streets empty. And the soldiers advanced in perfect formation, confident that they would secure the area within hours. They made it 3 blocks before the buildings came alive. Windows that had seemed like ordinary glass shattered outward as hidden weapon systems opened fire. And from basements and rooftops and sewers, humans emerged with weapons of every kind, from military rifles to hunting shotguns to homemade explosives. And they attacked with a ferocity that defied understanding. The aliens had expected civilians to flee or surrender. But these civilians did neither. An old woman fired a shotgun from her apartment window until enemy soldiers broke down her door. And even then she fought with a kitchen knife until they were forced to kill Hera. Teenage boy drove a truck filled with fertilizer explosives into a column of enemy vehicles, detonating the bomb and taking a dozen of them with him. A group of office workers who had been hiding in their building emerged to attack enemy soldiers from behind. Armed with nothing but letter openers and chair legs and the desperate courage of people defending their home, Sergeant Chris Morgan had been a park ranger before the invasion. A quiet man who had spent his life protecting forests and wildlife. But now he led a resistance unit of 40 fighters through the Appalachian Mountains. And he had become something very different. His group included farmers who knew every trail and hollow in these mountains. Teachers who had never fired a weapon before last month, but who had learned quickly. A retired judge who had been a Marine in his youth and who now served as their tactical advisor. And a 17-year-old girl named Megan Lewis, who had discovered a terrifying talent for shooting. Megan lay in the brush on a hillside, her grandfather's hunting rifle steady in her hands, and she watched through the scope as an enemy patrol moved along the valley below. "I count 12 targets," she whispered to Chris, who lay beside her with binoculars pressed to his eyes. "Take the one in front first," Chris replied, his voice calm and steady. "The rest will scatter for cover. And that is when we spring the trap." Megan took a breath, let it out slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the valley, and chaos erupted below as the enemy soldiers scrambled for cover. But the cover they chose had been carefully selected by Chris, and his team. Hidden charges detonated, turning the rocks and fallen trees into shrapnel that tore through the confused aliens. And before the survivors could recover, the rest of the resistance fighters opened fire from positions all around the valley. In 3 minutes, the patrol was eliminated, and Chris and his team faded back into the forest that had protected humans for thousands of years across the world. The same story repeated itself in 1,000 different variations in the mountains of Asia. Guerrilla fighters used ancient caves as bases from which to strike at enemy columns before vanishing into terrain that was impassable for the alien vehicles. In the jungles of South America, soldiers who had trained for decades in unconventional warfare turned the dense vegetation into a killing ground, where the aliens could not advance more than a few meters without losing people. In the deserts of Africa, nomadic fighters who had survived in one of Earth's harshest environments for generations now used that knowledge to ambush supply convoys and cut the enemy's lines of communication. And in the oceans, something even more devastating was happening. Admiral Nicole Grant commanded Earth's submarine fleet from a base carved into an underwater mountain, and she had been waiting for this moment her entire career. Enemy troop transports are crossing the Atlantic, her sensor officer reported. Approximately 400 vessels in convoy formation. Nicole studied the tactical display, noting the positions of her submarines spread throughout the ocean depths. "They have no idea we are here," she said quietly. "Their sensors cannot penetrate salt water, and they are sailing right over our heads like they own the sea." She gave the order, and from beneath the waves, death rose up to meet the invaders' torpedoes streaked through the dark water, striking the hulls of troop transports that had never been designed to face an underwater threat, and ships began to sink, dragging thousands of enemy soldiers down into the cold embrace of Earth's oceans. The aliens tried to fight back, but they could not see their attackers, could not track them, could not understand how these primitive humans had turned the vast, empty oceans into a weapon. By the time the survivors reached the shore, over 400 ships had been lost, and Admiral Grant was already repositioning her submarines for the next engagement on the flagship. Commander Drevax stared at the reports coming in from every continent, and he could not comprehend what he was seeing. His soldiers, the finest warriors in the galaxy, were being slaughtered by farmers and children, and old women. Humans who should have been paralyzed with fear were instead fighting with a rage that seemed to have no limit. And they did not stop even when wounded, even when surrounded, even when all hope was gone. They do not surrender, Kevin said, his voice hollow with shock. Even when we capture them, they escape or sabotage our equipment or attack their guards with their bare hands. Drevax finally understood what Ambassador Kira Neth had tried to tell the Council. Humans were not like other species, because other species had evolved on gentle worlds, where survival was a matter of cooperation and caution. Humans had evolved on a death world, a planet that had been trying to kill them since before they could walk upright. And they had responded by becoming the deadliest predators. Their world had ever seen war was not something they had learned. It was something they had been born for. Drevax made the only decision he could make under the circumstances. All forces are to retreat to orbit. Immediately, he ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. We cannot win this war on the ground. The transports that could still fly lifted off from the planet's surface, leaving behind destroyed equipment and fallen soldiers. And as they rose back into the safety of space, the humans below watched them go, but they did not celebrate because they knew this was not over yet. The remnants of the once mighty armada gathered in high orbit above Earth, battered and bleeding from wounds that no fleet in galactic history had ever suffered. And Commander Drevax counted his remaining forces with a hollow feeling in his chest of the 9,700 ships that had departed Council space. Only 2,100 remained operational, and most of those were damaged, low on ammunition, and crewed by soldiers who had lost their confidence. Along with their comrade Iskethan stood beside him on the bridge, and neither of them spoke for a long moment as they stared down at the blue planet that had cost them so much. We could bombard them from orbit, Kevin finally suggested. Though his voice lacked conviction, reduce their cities to ash and force them to surrender. Drevax shook his head slowly. Most of our heavy weapons were expended against the orbital stations, and what remains would not be enough to break them. We have seen how they fight. And even if we destroyed every city on that planet, the survivors would find a way to continue the war. He turned away from the viewport and walked to his command throne, sinking into it with the weariness of someone who had aged decades in a matter of weeks. I will negotiate, he announced. Ambassador Kira Neth traveled with the fleet as an observer, and I will send her to speak with the human leadership. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere under a flag of truce, and Kira Neth felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity as the blue sky gave way to green hills and then to the ruins of a city that had been a battlefield just days before. General Daniel Porter was waiting for her when she landed, standing amid the rubble with Secretary of Defense Nathan Price beside him. And around them stood soldiers whose faces showed the exhaustion and grief of people who had lost friends and family but who had never stopped fighting. Kira Neth stepped out of the shuttle and approached them with her hands raised to show she carried no weapons. I come to offer terms of peace, she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. The fleet will withdraw, and the Galactic Unity Council will recognize Earth's sovereignty, and in exchange, we ask only that humanity does not pursue vengeance against Council worlds. General Porter listened to her words without expression, and when she finished he was silent for a long moment. How many soldiers did you bring to Earth? He finally asked. Kira Neth hesitated, uncertain why this question mattered. Over 6 million. She admitted. Porter nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. And how many do you have left? She did not answer, because they both knew the number was less than 1 million. And most of those were wounded or traumatized beyond effective combat capability. Porter took a step toward her, and though he was smaller than her and unarmed, something in his eyes made her want to step back. Go back to your fleet, he said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that made her shiver. "Tell Commander Drevax that we do not accept his terms. And tell him that every ship in orbit has 1 hour to power down weapons and surrender unconditionally. And any vessel that attempts to flee will be destroyed." Kira Neth stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot possibly have the capability to enforce such a demand," she protested. "Your orbital defenses are destroyed. Your space forces are eliminated." "And 1 hour," Porter repeated, and there was something in his voice that made her stop arguing. She returned to her shuttle and flew back to the flagship, where she delivered the message to Commander Drevax. With a sense of dread building in her chest, Drevax laughed when he heard the ultimatum. A harsh, bitter sound that echoed across the bridge. "The humans are bluffing," he declared. "They have nothing left to threaten us with, and we will simply leave this cursed system and return to Council space." He turned to his navigation officer and gave the order that would end this disastrous campaign. "Prepare all ships for a hyperspace jump. We are going home." The fleet began powering up their jump drives. The familiar hum of faster than light, technology filling the ships with the promise of escape. But the drives did not activate. Engineers scrambled to diagnose the problem. And what they found made their blood run cold. Every ship in the fleet had been sabotaged during the chaos of the ground battles, while attention was focused on the fighting below. Small stealth shuttles had docked with enemy vessels, hidden among the debris of destroyed ships and the constant traffic of reinforcements. And aboard those shuttles were human special forces teams who had spent years training for exactly this mission. They had planted devices throughout the fleet, targeting the specific systems that made hyperspace travel possible. And now those devices had activated, leaving the Armada trapped in a system that had become a killing. Drevax stared at the engineering reports with horror, dawning on his face as he finally understood the truth. The humans had never intended to let them leave. "Commander," Kevin said, his voice tight with fear, "we are detecting an energy buildup on the far side of the planet's moon." The flagship sensors focused on the lunar surface, and what they saw made every officer on the bridge gasp. A massive installation was powering up, something so large that it had been hidden in plain sight, disguised as a mining operation for 2 decades, while generation after generation of workers had built it in secret. Was a railgun, larger than anything the Council had ever imagined, capable of launching projectiles the size of buildings at speeds that made them impossible to dodge or intercept. First shot struck Drevax's flagship directly amidships, and the Eternal Dominion broke apart in a flash of light that was visible from Earth's surface. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. Submarines that had been lurking in the oceans launched into space on rockets, carrying nuclear missiles that tore through the damaged fleet like fire through dry grass. And orbital platforms that had seemed destroyed came back online, their crews having faked their own deaths to wait for this moment. The railgun on the moon fired again and again, each shot destroying another ship, while human fighter craft that had been hiding in bunkers on Earth rose up to engage the survivors. The aliens tried to fight back, but they were outmaneuvered, outgunned, and completely overwhelmed by an enemy that had been preparing for this moment since before the Council even knew humanity existed. The battle lasted 4 hours, and when it ended, the skies above Earth were filled with debris, but not a single Council ship remained on the surface. People emerged from their shelters and looked up at the flashes of light that marked the destruction of the Armada, and they wept with relief and grief and a fierce pride that would be passed down through generations months later. Ambassador Kira Neth stood before the Galactic Unity Council, the only survivor of the invasion fleet, kept alive specifically to deliver a message. "They let me go," she told the silent chamber, "because they wanted you to know what happened, and they wanted you to understand what you were dealing with." She placed a data crystal on the table, containing recordings of every moment of the Armada's destruction. "Humans are not a species to be conquered," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber that had once seemed so powerful and now felt small and fragile. "They have known nothing but struggle since they first walked upright, fighting their planet and each other for survival. And war is not something they learned, it is something they are." High Chancellor Zorath watched the recordings with growing horror. Seeing his finest warriors destroyed by creatures he had dismissed as primitives. "And now they know we exist," Kiraneth continued. "They know where we live, and they are building ships." The council chamber erupted in panic. But Kiraneth simply watched with a strange calm. She had seen what humans were capable of, and she knew that nothing the council could do would change what was coming. Humanity did not forgive, humanity did not forget, and humanity was coming for them all.